Please give a very warm Notre Dame welcome to Reverend Ray Hammond.
Class of 2014, good morning. My sincere thanks to Father Jenkins, to the trustees, the faculty and staff, and to the many members of the South Bend community who have so graciously welcomed and hosted us. My congratulations to my stellar fellow honorands. And most especially, my thanks to the class of 2014 for the privilege of participating in this very special celebration. I am, as you know, the backup speaker for today. But I hope you'll join me in offering up prayers for Lord Christopher Patton, a man who has served his country, our world, and God's kingdom boldly and justly. I also want to give a special shout out to my fellow honorand and friend, His Eminence Sean Cardinal O'Malley. You can take it from an African Methodist Episcopal pastor who serves with him in Boston that he has been an incredibly healing presence in a traumatized community. And the archdiocese he leads, that's worthy of celebration. And the archdiocese that he leads has been an invaluable partner in turning back the tide of violence. For his partnership and friendship, I am deeply grateful. And then graduates like you, I have in this audience a posse of friends and family members for whose presence I am deeply thankful. And I gotta particularly acknowledge my wife, especially since I have to go home from here. She and I met in college, and in spite of the fact that, as she puts it, I was not her type, she married me anyway. She's been my friend. She's been my fellow laborer in raising a family, building a church, and making a contribution to the global community. And after almost 41 years of marriage, I can never be thankful enough to her and to God for allowing me to be her husband. My glory. Now that's it for the introductory remarks, because they only gave me 15 minutes to address you. And that's a bit of a challenge because I'm a preacher in the African American tradition, and we usually take 15 minutes to say hello. But mindful of the occasion and my constraints, I say to you what Kim Kardashian told Chris Humphries, and that is, I am not going to keep you long. Just long enough, graduates, to remind you that this is a day for looking back nostalgically over the years you have just spent at this iconic institution, Notre Dame. And just as you may be experiencing a flood of emotions, so too are your family and friends. I don't know if you can fully appreciate the joy we feel as we watch young women and men as bright, gifted, imaginative, and beautiful as you are, coming to this milestone in your lives. You are the children and now the young leaders that we dreamed about, prayed for, and longed to see. You've made us laugh, and you have made us cry, frequently at the same time. We have gotten on your last nerve, and you have certainly gotten on ours. But on this day, we celebrate together the immense joy you have brought to our lives and the high hopes that we have for you and for your future. This is your day because it could not have come to pass without your personal commitment to hard work and sacrifice. And this is our day because it could also have not come to pass without the gift, the grace of collective support from the people gathered around you today. So graduates, my simple request as you move to the next stages in life is that you remember that gift, that grace, and that you pass it on. Turn to your neighbor on the right and tell him, pass it on. Now, I'm asking this of you because I'm keenly aware of the connection between individual effort and collective support. And you've heard or read a little of my story, but what you don't know is that I grew up in Philadelphia at a time when gang warfare was rife, drugs were on the increase, and a lot of young women and men were wasted by the streets. I'm here today not simply because I'm smart or a hard worker, but because of the grace of God and because of the loving care of so many people, especially my parents. My mother, the first person in her family to ever go to college, dropped out of college during World War II because it was too expensive and her family needed her help. But she never forgot her dream of becoming an educator. So when her young children went to school, she went back to school to finish her bachelor's and get her master's of education and become a master teacher in the Philadelphia public schools. My father got his bachelor at the age of 50. And when he died at the age of 72, he had recently started working on his master's degree in theology. And despite all the demands of their own quest for growth and excellence, they always had time to help their children go even farther than they had gone. Sure, I worked hard, but I am not confused. I was tremendously blessed by the gift of grace and unmerited favor from others. I had elementary school teachers like Mr. Finkelstein and Mrs. Shepard who had high expectations and even higher support for me. Church members and friends who always gave me encouragement with words about how much progress I made. There were civil rights marchers and protesters who fought and in some cases died to open doors of opportunity that had remained shut to people like me for 400 years of this nation's history. I, like you, am the recipient of a wonderful gift of grace from God and from others, and I gotta pass it on. That's why I'm convinced there is no more dangerous or delusional myth than that of the self-made man or woman. No one is now or has ever been self-made. Whenever we stand tall, and you are standing tall today, it's because we stand on the shoulders of giants. We are the recipients of a wonderful grace, and I pray that you will pass it on. Now, let me tell you an example of just how powerful passing that on can be. And I want to offer you an apocryphal but a poignant story first shared with me by a mentor and friend, Marion Wright Edelman. On the first day of school, a teacher, Jean Thompson, stands in front of her 5th grade class and tells her children a lie. She tells them that she loves them all the same and she's going to treat them all alike. But in the beginning, that's impossible because in front of her, slumped in his seat on the 3rd row, is a boy named Teddy Stoddard. Mrs. Thompson already knows that Teddy doesn't play well with the other children, that Teddy's clothes are unkempt, that Teddy needs a bath, and that Teddy is generally unpleasant. But slowly, what Jean Thompson felt and thought she knew about Teddy began to unravel. Because one day she read Teddy's school file, and boy, was she surprised. Teddy's 1st grade teacher wrote, "Teddy is a bright, inquisitive child with a ready laugh. He does his work neatly. He's got great manners. He is a joy to be around." His 2nd grade teacher wrote, "Teddy is an excellent student, well-liked by his classmates, but he's troubled because his mother has a terminal illness and life at home must be a struggle." His 3rd grade teacher wrote, "Teddy continues to work hard, but his mother's death has been hard on him. He tries to do his best, but his father doesn't show a lot of interest, and his home life will soon affect him if some steps aren't taken." And then Teddy's 4th grade teacher wrote, "Teddy is withdrawn and doesn't show much interest in school. He doesn't have many friends, and he sometimes sleeps in class. He is tardy, and he really could become a problem." Jean Thompson was beginning to understand the problem, but before she could think about what to do, the Christmas season was on her, and there was a school play and other activities, and so much was going on until the last day before the holiday vacation. Every child brought her Christmas gifts, wrapped in gay ribbon and bright paper, except for Teddy, whose gift was clumsily wrapped in the heavy brown paper of a cut-up grocery bag. And when she opened that bag, some of the children started laughing because in it was a rhinestone bracelet with several missing stones and a bottle that was only 1/4 full of perfume. She ended their laughter when she put the bracelet on and said, "Oh, this is really pretty," and then dabbed some of that perfume on her wrist and talked about how sweet it smelled. And Teddy stayed behind just long enough to tell Jean Thompson that the bracelet and the perfume had belonged to his mother. And as he left, he said this, "Mrs. Thompson, today you smell just like my mom used to." After Teddy left, she cried and asked God to forgive her for her self-absorption, her blindness, and her failure to remember that but for grace, Teddy's story would be her story. She also promised God that she would stop teaching reading and writing and arithmetic. Instead, she would teach children. And she kept her promise and paid a special attention to a child named Teddy. I mean, the more she worked with Teddy, the more his mind came alive. The more she encouraged him, the faster he responded. On days that there was an important test, she would wear the rhinestone bracelet and the perfume. And by the end of the year, Teddy had become one of the smartest kids in the class. And he'd become really special to a teacher determined to make a difference where that difference mattered most. Teddy left the class. A year later, she found a note under her door telling her that of all the teachers he'd had, she was his favorite. 6 years later, she got another note. He'd finished high school third in his class. 4 years later, another note saying that things had been tough, but he had graduated from college with honors. And then 4 years after that, yet another letter in which he signed Theodore F. Stoddard, MD. Following spring, there was a final letter from Teddy saying he was getting married. His father died a couple of years ago. He had no real blood family, but he was wondering if Mrs. Thompson might agree to sit in the pew usually reserved for the mother of the groom. And she sat in that pew and witness the difference that it makes when the gift of grace in your own life is passed on to someone else. So graduates, you're the recipients of a great grace, and my simple request is that you pass it on. Tell your neighbor on the left, pass it on. And how about this? I challenge you to have the courage to pass it on to people who are not the usual suspects. The people that others have written off, the least, the lost, the left out, the abused, the abandoned, the incarcerated, the poorly educated, the unborn, the near dead, the immigrant, the homeless, the trafficked, the marginalized of every stripe and description, the folks, the families, the neighborhoods, and the nations whose challenges and failures, like Teddy Stoddard's, are well known and widely trumpeted, but whose possibilities are rarely appreciated. So pass it on. Because you take to heart the words of Jesus who declared, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me." Or because the words of Father Gustavo Gutierrez ring in your ears as he says, "Neighbor is not he whom I find in my path, but rather she in whose path I place myself, he whom I approach and actively seek." Or because you believe, like Shirley Chisholm, the first African-American woman elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, who said, "Service is the rent you pay for occupying the planet." It's a lesson that God has imprinted on my life time and time again. Every time I meet with a young woman or a young man caught up in the violence of urban streets, the Teddy Stoddards with hats to the back and pants down low and guns not far away, I know this is not charity. This is just me, and much older urban kid passing on the grace of God to a younger urban kid. When my wife and myself found ourselves standing on a hot savanna on the 4th of July in South Sudan with 1,000 women and children who'd been rescued from servitude in northern Sudan, this was not charity. This was two proud descendants of another century's slaves passing the grace of presence and solidarity on to this century's slaves. And then, There was Northern Ireland, and the walking tour with the friend and former IRA man, who was now working for peace between Protestant and Catholic communities. And as we walked through the shattered and largely deserted ruins of that Belfast street on which he grew up, he stopped and said, "Ray, I want to show you something that was a source of inspiration and hope for me through the darkest days." We rounded a corner, and to my amazement, on that wall there was a gigantic mural of Martin Luther King with the caption reading, "Injustice anywhere is an affront to justice everywhere." So graduates, pass it on. Tell the neighbor behind you, pass it on. Pass it on as more than 200 of your classmates are doing in a postgraduate year of service. Pass it on by thinking less about your career and more about your calling. Your calling to become educators who, like Gene Thompson, teach people, not subjects. Your calling to become lawyers who are deeply committed to justice. Your calling to become physicians committed to healing people and not just diseases. Your calling to be business people with a sense of sacred stewardship over the resources and people entrusted not to their management, but to their servant leadership. Your calling to be artists who preserve and extend our common culture and give us new insights and visions of beauty. Your calling to be scientists and engineers and architects who explore, reveal, reshape, and even heal an amazing creation. Your calling to be parents who not only have children, but who raise children and love children. Your calling to be citizens who don't just ask, "What's good for me?" but what's good for all of us, especially the people I don't know and I don't like. Now you're a graduate, a Notre Dame graduate, and I know that you will never forget the God Quad, Touchdown Jesus, First Down Moses, the joys of LaFun, praying at the grotto for finals, and the fact that you can now walk up the front steps of the Golden Dome. But my fervent prayer is that you will always remember the gift of grace you have received, the grace of parents who love you, the grace of friends who embrace you, the grace of teachers who have taught you, and the grace of opportunities that lay before you. And for your sake and God's sake, I pray that you pass it on. God bless you.